Welcome to the annual general meeting of VRX Silica Limited. My name's Paul Boyatzis and I'll be chairing today's meeting. With me today is our Managing Director, Mr Bruce Maluish, and our Non-Executive Directors, Mr Peter Pavlovich and Mr David Welsh. Also present is our Company Secretary, Mr Ian Hobson, and the company's auditor, RSM Australia Partners, represented by Brian Ting. Ladies and gentlemen, voting on today's resolution will be decided by poll. Lisa Arwan from Computershare Investor Services will be returning officer and will conduct today's poll. You should have already received a green poll card on registration. I draw your attention to the attendance register and ask you to register your attendance if you have not already done so. The purpose of today's meeting is to deal with the formal business as set out in the notice of meeting. However, before we conduct that business, Bruce will give an update and presentation on the company, so I'll hand over to Bruce.
Thank you, Paul. Today is being recorded, but many of you may have, I recognise many faces. Most of you would have heard this presentation before. However, we'll get it out on the website as well, so I will run through the whole presentation. Silica sand, that's where we sit at the moment, and we've been involved in silica sand now, unfortunately, for about 5 years to date. I say unfortunate because we're still not in production, but we're getting closer to that every day. This is an interesting statement. Vince Beiser is an American journalist and wrote a book, The World in a Grain, and it's the story of sand and how it transforms civilization. It's worth noting, and it's worth trying to chase this book up. Strangely enough, who thought that a book about sand would be compelling reading? But it is. And it's well written, and he's a journalist that first came across a story about a policeman getting killed in India when he tried to stop some illegal sand mining. And he thought, why are people dying over sand? And he investigated a little bit further and found that the world is running out of silica sand, particularly because of concrete. But it's one of those commodities that just gets used everywhere. It's not just glass. It's in the paint. About 30% of the paint has got a filler in it, which is a very fine silica flour in it, the lighting tubes, the screen itself over here, LCDs, and when you start talking about casting in cars, heads, blocks and manifolds are cast in silica sand, silicon rubber. Your car tyres have been made with silicon rubber now for about 50 years, and they wear a hell of a lot better than they used to. And in fact, the amount of silica and the other reagents they put into tyres is actually quite complex. But it's yet another use that you don't, yes, you hear silicon rubber, but you don't actually immediately think silica flour. So it's a product that you're using all the time. And unfortunately, almost none of those items are manufactured here in Australia. We're trying to change that. And to do that, we really need some good quality silica sand. This is part of the issue. At the moment, the world uses about 50 billion tonnes of silica sand a year. Now, 49.5 billion of that goes into concrete, and therein lies part of the problem. And the main problem is, particularly now, stimulus spending all around the world is generally in infrastructure. Infrastructure means concrete. 30% of that concrete is, why is that going crazy? 30% of concrete is silica sand. So there's such a demand for silica sand, particularly in concrete, and we're slowly running out of it because even deposits that may be beneficiated to the quality required for glass are not getting the opportunity to do that because it's all disappearing into concrete. So the world is running out of silica sand. When I say silica sand, don't think beaches, that's mainly calcium carbonate, and forget deserts. So desert sands, that orangey red colour you see is iron. Iron is the enemy for almost all the products made from silica sand, and they're all high in iron. They're also not suitable for concrete because they're rounded off because they're windblown. So if you take those out of the equation, you're not left with huge deposits of silica sand. And in fact, in Asia, the bulk of the deposits are within freshwater rivers and lakes. Now, access to those is steadily decreasing. People won't put up with rivers collapsing because they've been over-dredged, and certainly taken out wildlife in freshwater lakes is a problem. So, one, they're depleting resources and losing access because they're in rivers and lakes. And that is in a market where the demand is steadily increasing. The demand, particularly for glass, foundry products, and all the other products made out of silica sand, steadily increasing. So the industry itself is a bit of a dilemma. Australia is well poised. Australia is the single biggest exporter of silica sand in the world. Now, 2.5 to 3.5 million tonnes comes out of Cape Flattery in northern Queensland. It's been operating for over 50 years. It's been more than 60 years. The last 50 years it's been owned by Mitsubishi, operated by Mitsubishi, and largely exports to Mitsubishi-related companies. But here in WA, we've got Hanson Industries exports about 350,000 tonnes a year. Most of that gets made into a silica flour. Down south here we've got Kemerton. They produce a silica sand. As it happens, it's very high in aluminium, and the bulk of that goes to the Philippines to make San Miguel beer bottles. And Albany sands, most of that goes to Japan and ends up in car windscreens. So Australia has always had this history of exporting it, but most of them are run by big multinationals. Kemerton, Albany, owned by Toyota Totsu. Two very large corporations, so they're actually supplying to themselves. So as an industry, it hasn't really made much money in Australia because the cost of shipping from Australia to Asia is still very expensive. However, because of the demand and the supply situation, the price has steadily increased to the point where now it can handle the cost of shipping to Asia. So there will be a much larger silica sand sector in Australia. And we want to make sure we're leading that cause. Our main markets we're looking at, particularly for Arrowsmith North, is the foundry industry, but also for float glass, which is flat or plate glass, and container glass. And for Mushay, we're looking to be producing the silica sand suitable for producing cover glass for solar panels. And of course, that's a market that is going just crazy at the moment, increasing by about 30% per year. In fact, the piece of glass that goes over solar panels is very high tech. One, it's ultra clear because you don't want to diffract sunlight. Sunlight equals power, but also it's got to withstand hail. So we have a very difficult prospect of making that glass in Australia because we don't have the IP in Australia. But we are talking to a couple of the major glass manufacturers in Australia, Korea and Japan, to entice them to come to Australia and start making glass here, particularly out of Mushay. WA also has a distinct economic advantage, especially these days, is the price of our LNG. 80% of the cost of producing glass is energy. You've only got a number of ingredients, but you've got to heat them up to 1600 degrees. So it's very energy intensive. WA has some of the cheapest LNG in the world, has increased in price in the last few months, but it's still extremely cheap compared to the rest of the world, and still significantly cheaper than what they're paying for over the East Coast. So well, we think we've got the team to keep pushing this. It's an experienced corporate team and an experienced technical team as well. So I think we're well placed to be able to get these projects up and running. So we've got 5 projects. 3 of them are around Arrowsmith, Mushay and Boyatup down at Esperance. We try to keep these projects as simple as we possibly can. They're low impact mining and processing, and we've made sure we've selected ground that's close to existing infrastructure. But one of the features that we've got is we've got very large deposits. So the companies we're talking to for offtake, we're looking at very long-term contracts. In the world of silica sand, 3 years was regarded as a long-term contract. We're looking at 10 years. So, and we're able to do that when we've got nearly 100 years worth of production from each of our projects. So they're multi-decade scale long, they're contiguous, and we've got very significant high grade. We're easily the most advanced silica sand projects in Australia. There are a number of other players, a number of them have come onto the market recently because of what we've been doing. We've got mining leases granted over a number of them. Arrowsmith North is leading the pack, and we're getting close to finalising environmental approvals for that project, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And that'll be followed by Muchet and Arrowsmith Central. One day buoy it up, and probably a new prospect that we put out an announcement on in August for Arrowsmith Brand, which is also up near our Arrowsmith project. We still get an enormous amount of interest. We're still getting weekly companies, some of them just traders, but we get emails weekly seeking supply of silica sand, most often for high grade. Muchet has definitely got the notice of quite a number of companies in Southeast Asia. Arrowsmith North, we've put out a BFS in 2019. We're updating that now. Having completed all the engineering, we've been out to tender for all the major components. We're redoing that now, and we'll have a new capital estimate. It's certainly gone up. The cost of steel and concrete have increased since 2019 when we last did the BFS. But we got over 200 million tonnes. And we'll update the BFS as soon as we get some of these tender items back from the original equipment manufacturers. Muchet, it's still sitting there. We just did a small drill program the other day. We're waiting on federal approval to do some more drilling there. And we're close to finalising that too. We require what's called a native vegetation clearing permit. We're not actually clearing anything. All we're doing is driving over some bush with a track-mounted tiny little drill rig, but still require a native vegetation clearing permit, which is not easily to get. But we're in the final throes of that one as well, and we expect to get permission to do some quite extensive drilling there at Muchet. Arrowsmith North, it will take 6 to 8 months to build the plant once we get final approvals. We've grade controlled the first 6 years of production. The processing plant has finished all the engineering, all the way down to fabrication drawings, and we're in the middle of a revised capital estimate. It's still got an established infrastructure. We've got access to rail and port. Unloading trains at the moment in the Geraldton port's a bit difficult, so our first couple of years will be trucking, but it'll be rail after that. It's very close to Brand Highway. We have finalised the permit for the intersection on Brand Highway, and we're looking at a gas power supply most likely. We would like to get some solar in there as well, but of course the issue comes up with solar panels. We can't go and clear vegetation to put in a solar farm, even though it'll save emissions. It'll reduce emissions. So we have to try and get a hold of some cleared land, and there's not easy access to cleared land at Arrowsmith North. It's called Quangan Heath. There's about 380,000 hectares of declared Quangan Heath, but it's only about waist high. It's predominantly the Banksias you can see in front, but the recalcitrant species here are the little grasses and the sedges. And we've developed this rehabilitation technique called VDT, vegetation direct transfer, whereby we take sods of this out and translocate it, basically transplant it. It's been demonstrated to be easily the most effective environmental rehabilitation technique known. So it's probably a little bit of an expensive exercise at the beginning, but we don't expect to have to do any follow-up planting. The only species here that can be followed up probably are the banksias. They are pretty easy to propagate. The grasses and sedges are very difficult to propagate. And they're in fact the issue when dealing with this type of vegetation. But this technique here is primarily designed to deal with those, because the root systems there are only 200-300, mainly around 200 millimetres, and we're taking out a 400 mil sod. So we're persisting with this with the EPA. Fortunately, Silica have a trial area not far from us, and that's been able to be demonstrated to be easily much more effective than conventional techniques, which are bulldoze to one side, dig the sand and bulldoze it back. So fortunately, when we did lodge this, we got approval from DCCEEW, the Federal Environmental Department. They gave us what's called an accredited approval. So if the state approves it, they will approve it. They're extremely difficult to get now. They won't give you an accredited approval anymore. So they still want to see it, so you end up duplicating all your work, and the whole point of that was to not duplicate your work. But we do have that in place. The State Department required a PER, despite the fact they were happy not to go with that when we first spoke to them. The second stage of it is a scoping document, which we had approved in March 22. We then lodged the environmental review document in April 2022, and it is largely the same. The changes on it are very minor. We amended it in June, and again in February 23. That document hasn't changed from February 23, and it finally got published in June, finished July, and the EPA gave us a summary of submissions in September. There were only 6 submissions. There were 2 from a couple of NGOs, 2 from government departments. I still don't understand why a government department has to wait to the public environmental review to lodge submissions. But anyway, we've since dealt with all those, and we lodged the response to those submissions in October. We've had confirmed from the EPA just a couple of days ago that they don't require any more information from us, but they are circulating it back to the 2 government agencies that did lodge comments. Once they get a response back from those, we don't expect, we think we're well and truly dealt with them. We don't expect it to be able to, they've said they don't require any more information from us at this point. So, and the next step from that is a report to the Minister and approval from the Minister. That could take still some time, and Christmas is going to get thrown in the middle there, so we're not expecting approvals for this until early next year. At which point we can then pull the trigger on construction. There's a mining proposal and with DMERS and a works approval also that are in the process as well. And they'll be approved subject to the EPA approval. Arrowsmith, Muche, we've prepared all the documentation to go in there. Unfortunately, the EPA has told us that they will only review one project at a time. Because of that, our ESD has been sitting in at Arrowsmith Central since June last year. I don't know, it's a policy that they've brought in some while ago. So we're not lodging Muche until we get Arrowsmith North finished. But all the lessons we learned from the Arrowsmith North process will directly apply to Muche. So we think our referral will get us a lot further down the track than would normally be the case. But Muche, it's just 50 k's north of Perth. Of course, it will get more scrutiny than Arrowsmith North, which was a lot more isolated. But we'll do our best to inform all the stakeholders in and around that district before we lodge the referral. So if there are any issues raised, we'll try and deal with them very early in the piece. We've got a granted mining lease and miscellaneous licences to get access there. We want some more ground, and we've got another mining lease pending. We've done a lot of metallurgical test work here, and we can produce a very saleable product. But it's also a product that's very suitable for downstream processing, and there are a number of opportunities there that we're looking at. It's a bit different. It's got these Menziesii, the taller Banksias. Once again, they're easy to propagate, and really it's the low grasses and the sedges that we're looking to deal with VDT, or a form of VDT in any case, to get a better rehabilitation outcome there than any conventional method. Simple processing. The key to this is attritioning. Attritioning is an agitated slurry where each of the grains are rubbing on each other, and it polishes each of the grains. And each of the grains is a little tiny quartz crystal. And these are derived from granite. So the material you've got in there is mainly feldspar, micas and quartz, and the hardest component there is quartz. So the one that dominates the suite of minerals in it is the quartz. So the whole process there is to polish the quartz and then get rid of everything else, which is mainly soft clays. So it's attritioning, hydrofloat will take out feldspar, and then any screening there will remove any of the clay material. As it happens, all of the products we produce from this we can sell. Not just the 3 or 4 glass making and foundry products, but also the clay that we remove is also sellable. So there is no tails dam, and we sell everything we can process. This is very recent. This is actual 3D rendering of the engineering. It looks like it's built, but it's not built. But that's what it'll look like, and it'll very closely resemble that. As you can see, it's really just the steel frame that holds all the components, and the components are almost off the shelf. Some of them are slightly redesigned for us, the thickener's designed for us, the cyclone cluster at the top is designed for us. But the things like the hydrofloat and the attritioning cells, they're all off the shelf. So really we're just building a frame to hold all these components in there. And these are all tried and proved components. We're not doing anything here that's totally unique. Probably the hydrofloat is used elsewhere, particularly in the lithium processing. We're using it for a different reason, but the piece of equipment itself is nothing. We're not suddenly redesigning anything like that. We've got a water bore can produce about 90 litres per second. We need about 50. From the Yarragadee, it's quite deep, 350 metres deep is the water is. So big process water dam. We're very cognizant of our sustainability and the goals that are required there. And we also think that the bulk of these are best addressed at the planning stage. So we spend a lot of time trying to reduce our carbon footprint and also the impact on the local communities. There are a number of other initiatives. The Critical Minerals Prospectus, we were included in the 2022 prospectus. It's produced by Austrade. We've been informed that we'll be also again in the 2023 prospectus, which sounds like it's actually going to come out in January 2024. We have a Industry Attraction Fund grant of $2 million to investigate the production of silica flour. We've done some preliminary work, and we've just prepared a 1 tonne sample out of Muche, and we've sent that to Germany, and that test work is underway now. That'll give us a bit of detail, particularly the yield we can get from it to produce silica flour. There's a couple of products we produce out of it, and it's all down to the grain size, but we'd be able to produce a flour suitable for the LCD glass manufacturing market. which is growing also at an incredible rate. If you think about, you know, where you see LCDs these days, almost every piece of equipment all the way down to your coffee machine's got LCDs in it. So we're looking to see what sort of yield we can get out of that. But we can sell the whole product. Once again, there's each of the size fractions in there have got separate markets. So the very fine stuff will end up going is probably paint filler. But there's a number of other markets as well for silica flour. Geothermal, we were granted a geothermal tenement. We've done a deal with another group who's got the expertise and the technical personnel, so we don't need to go and fire up a whole new crowd just to develop that. However, we get priority for any energy that gets produced from the geothermal. It appears from the geothermal gradient that has been established because there's a gas project in the middle of this, so it looks like the geothermal gradient has about 200 degrees at 4,000 metres. Long way down, but not unusual these days. And 200 degrees is where you want to be for producing steam. So we farm that out. And the trials of VDT, we've got a native vegetation clearing permit at Muchet for drilling, but also to trial VDT in that particular vegetation type. And we've built a modified bucket to go on a 980 loader that's required for VDT. Share price sitting around 10.5, 11 cents at the moment. It's been sitting there for a while. We're sort of market capped at 60 odd million. Cash, that was at the end of September. It's about $1 million less there now. But the current enterprise value is probably undervalued a bit, but certainly if we get our environmental approvals, there'll be a significant increase in the enterprise value. So it's the greatest consideration here is in fact the silica sand market. It's quite difficult to research. It's reasonably easy to get a lot of detailed, particularly media reports on the supply side of the equation, but it is very difficult to research the final use of silica sand, mainly because it's most of the production of products that use silica sand are within very large multinationals. So it's difficult to find even where glass is produced. Our market intelligence, fortunately, is very good. Our marketing guy has been involved in silica sand sales and buying for about 19 years, so we get market intelligence probably better than any other group that's looking at silica sand. But we've got a very large resource. We don't need to go looking for more sand. Any drilling we do now is to improve the confidence levels in any of our resources, but we're not looking for extra sand. We've got more than enough. Really, we need to be taking advantage of the fact that WA has domestic gas reserves. There's a certain amount of the gas on onshore wells that has to be sold domestically. There's some debate about whether they've been doing that or not, but it's a setup that is fairly unique to WA, and we've got to be able to take advantage of that, particularly if we want to make products that are high, energy intensive products. But also the potential for hydrogen in the Midwest. There's half a dozen projects we know of, probably 2 or 3 we're fairly confident of them getting up. We have in place also another agreement with Exodus, who are looking to develop hydrogen at the Warradagi wind farm. One of the great sort of features we have is very large deposits, so we can sign up for long-term projects. And really what we want to do ultimately is to be producing a high purity or high quality ultra clear glass here in Western Australia, one way or another. And that's makes the potential for solar panels. Australia imports 99% of its solar panels, and 90% of those come from China. and about 90% of those come from one company. The sovereign risk to Australia at the moment, for it to try and meet its carbon aspirations, requires an unbelievable number of solar panels. Twiggy just picked up, 1,500 square kilometres of ground for solar panels. Who knows where he's going to get the solar panels from? And at the moment, the only place you're going to get them from is China. So the risk to Australia is extremely high. The government recognises that. We've had conversations with Bowen, Albanese, and they fully understand the sovereign risk to Australia for solar panels. So the government understands what we want to do. They say they would like to help, but certainly the thinking behind the requirement for solar panels in Australia is very high. Thank you very much.